The sound of silence on my farm was deafening that early morning. I stepped out onto my porch expecting the usual steady hum of my irrigation system, but instead, all I heard was an unsettling void. My heart skipped a beat as I scanned the horizon. The familiar glow that once illuminated my fields had vanished, replaced by an eerie darkness that swallowed everything in its path. I fumbled for the light switch, only to discover that the entire property was plunged in a blackout. For years, I had prided myself on maintaining a self-sufficient operation at Green Valley Farm, a place where nature and hard work combined to create a life free from arbitrary rules. But today, an invisible enemy had cut off my lifeline. As I hurried toward the breaker panel, my mind raced with questions. Who would dare disrupt my power? And why, of all people, would they target me? It didn't take long to piece together the culprit. Karen Miller, the notorious enforcer of our neighborhood's strict HOA rules, had made it abundantly clear that my refusal to join their community initiative was unacceptable. In her eyes, loyalty to the HOA was non-negotiable, and if I wouldn't conform, I'd have to pay the price. The sudden absence of power wasn't a random malfunction. It was a calculated move to force me into line. I could almost picture Karen's smug smile as she sat in her meticulously manicured front yard, convinced that she had triumphed over a stubborn nonconformist. Little did she know that her petty attempt to bully me was about to backfire in a way that would shake the very foundations of our community. Today, I wasn't going to take her violation quietly. I was determined to turn the tables, using every resource and every ounce of ingenuity at my disposal. With my heart pounding in my chest and adrenaline surging through my veins, I resolved to take immediate action. This was no longer just about a power cut. It was about standing up for my right to live and work on my own terms, free from the oppressive grip of an overzealous HOA enforcer. In that silent, dark moment, as I worked to restore my connection to the grid, I vowed that Karen's attempt at coercion would be met with consequences that she could never have foreseen. Green Valley Farm had always been my sanctuary, a sprawling, self-sustaining homestead tucked away on the edge of rural Liberty County. Passed down through generations, the farm was a patchwork of open fields, thriving orchards, and modern innovations that I had painstakingly integrated over the years. Solar panels glittered on the barn roof, wind turbines hummed in the distance, and a network of smart irrigation systems ensured that every crop received the precise amount of water it needed. This was a place where hard work and independent spirit came together, free from the constraints imposed by bureaucratic red tape. Just a few miles away, however, lay the tightly controlled community of Liberty Estates, a gated neighborhood known for its uniform lawns, identical houses, and an HOA that ruled with an iron fist. In Liberty Estates, conformity was not merely encouraged. It was enforced with a level of precision that left little room for personal expression. Every detail, from the color of your shutters to the style of your mailbox, was dictated by a strict set of guidelines that the board guarded jealously. At the forefront of this regimented order was Karen Miller, known throughout the neighborhood as HOA Karen. In her early 50s and always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, Karen carried a clipboard like a badge of honor. With an unwavering gaze and a propensity for finding fault in even the most minor details, she had built her reputation on ensuring that every resident of Liberty Estates adhered to the community's strict aesthetic. To Karen, individuality was a threat, one that needed to be stamped out before it could spread. I, on the other hand, had always been a nonconformist. Despite growing up in the same county, I had chosen a different path, one that celebrated independence and innovation. Green Valley Farm was my canvas, a place where I could nurture my crops, experiment with sustainable technology, and express myself freely. My refusal to join the HOA's mandatory community initiatives was not out of rebellion for its own sake. It was a matter of principle. I believed that true freedom came from the right to live and work without being forced to adhere to someone else's rigid standards. For years, Karen had tried to impose her narrow vision on every aspect of our community. I had received fines for minor infractions at my farm, complaints about the brightness of my signage, the arrangement of my produce stand, even the color of my barn door. Each find was a reminder that in Liberty Estates, no one was allowed to deviate from the prescribed norm. And when Karen decided to cut my power for refusing to join their community spirit initiative, it wasn't just an attack on my property. It was a direct challenge to my very way of life. The stark contrast between the free-spirited independence of Green Valley Farm and the suffocating uniformity of Liberty Estates couldn't have been more evident. My property was a testament to innovation, to the beauty of organic growth and sustainable living, while Liberty Estates was a meticulously managed showcase of conformity. And now, as I stood in the dark, fighting to restore power, I knew that Karen's petty tactics were about to be met with consequences that would echo far beyond my own homestead. In the aftermath of the power cut, the air around Green Valley Farm grew thick with tension and the smell of burnt circuitry. My emergency backup systems kicked in, but the disruption was not enough to mask the deliberate nature of the act. I began combing through my security camera footage, and within minutes, I uncovered what I feared most: a clear, time-stamped video of Karen Miller creeping along the perimeter of my property late at night. There she was, with a determined expression, methodically cutting power cables that fed directly into my farm's grid. The evidence was irrefutable. This was no malfunction. Karen had intentionally cut off my power as a punishment for my refusal to join the HOA's community initiative. I wasted no time compiling a digital dossier. I saved every frame of the footage, noted the exact timestamps, and began documenting the unusual fluctuations in my power logs. It was a painstaking process, but every piece of evidence reinforced my resolve. Karen had overstepped her bounds, not only violating my property rights, but also challenging the very principles of independent living that I cherished. With the evidence in hand, I first approached the HOA board. I submitted a formal complaint, complete with screenshots, video clips, and a detailed account of the power cut. I demanded that the board address Karen's blatant abuse of power immediately. But I knew from past experience that the board, heavily influenced by Karen's long-standing reputation, might dismiss my complaint as a minor technical issue or a misunderstanding. The thought that they could possibly condone such an act of vandalism fueled my determination even further. Determined to send a message that would be impossible to ignore, I began planning my counterstrike. I knew that if Karen thought she could punish me by cutting my power, I had to retaliate in a way that would reclaim my autonomy and force the HOA to rethink its oppressive policies. I decided to leverage one of my greatest assets, my farm's self-sufficiency. I had spent years building a robust, renewable energy system that made my farm independent of the unreliable local grid. And now it was time to use that system as my weapon. I began by meticulously reviewing the technical schematics of my energy setup. I identified the critical nodes where I could redirect the flow of electricity with minimal risk to my own operations. With careful precision, I activated a series of switches on my control panel that I had installed years ago for emergencies. In one swift, calculated move, I rerouted the power away from Karen's designated service area, the very same area that the HOA used to monitor community compliance. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, the lights on Karen's house flickered and then went dark. Word of the blackout spread quickly through our tight-knit community. Neighbors, who had long suffered under the arbitrary fines and petty rules of the HOA, began to rally behind me. Social media exploded with supportive messages, with hashtags like #PowerBack and #NoMoreKaren trending locally. It wasn't just about the stolen power, it was about reclaiming the right to live on my own terms. But Karen wasn't ready to let it go. Furious and desperate to restore her control, she launched a series of frantic phone calls to the HOA board, demanding an explanation for the outage. I could hear her voice, thick with indignation, as she insisted that her actions were justified and that my refusal to join the community initiative had warranted such a response. However, every call, every angry message she sent was met with the unwavering evidence of my countermeasure, a decisive, irreversible act of reclaiming my property rights. The conflict quickly escalated from a simple power dispute to a full-blown community crisis. Neighbors began sharing their own experiences with the HOA's arbitrary enforcement, and a digital petition demanding reform of the HOA's policies gathered thousands of signatures. My digital dossier, now complete with irrefutable evidence of Karen's actions and my legally sanctioned counteraction, became the rallying cry for those who believed in individual freedom and property rights. I prepared for the inevitable showdown with the HOA board by organizing a series of meetings with supportive residents and legal advisors. I wanted to ensure that my actions were not only justified, but also seen as a lawful exercise of my rights as a property owner. Every day, as I monitored my farm's restored power system, I could feel the collective determination of our community building, a shared resolve that we would no longer tolerate petty tyranny. By the end of that tumultuous week, the stage was set for a dramatic public hearing. The entire community was buzzing with anticipation, and every shared video clip and supportive comment reinforced one undeniable truth. If Karen Miller thought she could punish me by cutting my power, she would soon learn that I was not alone. My fight was now a symbol of the broader struggle for autonomy in the face of oppressive control. In the wake of my counteraction, the digital landscape of our community exploded. Social media channels lit up with videos and screenshots capturing the dramatic moment when Karen's house went dark. Hashtags like hashtag #PowerBack, hashtag #NoMoreKaren, and hashtag #OwnYourRights quickly spread, turning what began as a personal dispute into a rallying cry for all residents tired of arbitrary HOA control. Local news outlets were quick to pick up the story. Reporters arrived on the scene, interviewing neighbors and capturing live footage of my farm's resilient power system. This is a classic David versus Goliath scenario, one anchor commented during a live broadcast, where one determined homeowner reclaims his rights against an overzealous enforcer. The narrative shifted from a petty power cut to a broader discussion on individual freedom and the right to manage one's own property. Inside the HOA board, tensions boiled over. Emergency meetings were convened in shadowed conference rooms, and leaked minutes painted a picture of deep division. Some board members, long sympathetic to Karen's strict approach, argued that rules were rules and that any deviation, no matter how trivial, could not be tolerated. Others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the voices of a united community, contended that Karen's actions were a gross overreach and a direct violation of property rights. Heated debates ensued, with one board member stating, "We must protect the freedom of our residents, even if it means rethinking long-standing policies." The internal rift was palpable, and as more residents shared their own stories of arbitrary fines and intrusive enforcement, the board's credibility began to crumble. I continued to document every development. Live streams, blog posts, and social media updates became a constant stream of evidence, showcasing the success of my counteraction. Neighbors posted videos of their own power restoration and shared personal testimonies about the impact of the HOA's rigid rules. Every shared hashtag, every comment of support, further solidified our collective resolve. The digital petition I initiated demanding that the HOA board revise its policies gathered thousands of signatures in a matter of days, reinforcing the message that our community would no longer be cowed by petty authority. Karen Miller, for her part, found herself increasingly isolated. Her frantic calls to the HOA board and desperate attempts to explain her actions were met with a tidal wave of digital evidence that painted a starkly different picture. In a series of hastily recorded videos, she tried to defend her decision to cut my power by citing community standards and safety concerns. But every claim was systematically dismantled by the clear, unassailable facts laid out in my digital dossier. The more she tried to justify her actions, the more the community rallied behind me, celebrating the reclaiming of my rights and the bold stand against oppressive control. The situation reached a boiling point when the HOA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the matter and to decide on disciplinary action against those responsible for the power cut. The announcement sent shockwaves through our community, and preparations for the hearing began in earnest. Residents organized meetings, rallied outside the HOA office, and shared their own experiences with arbitrary rule enforcement. The energy was electric, a potent mixture of indignation, solidarity, and the unyielding belief that property rights and individual freedom must be defended at all costs. On the eve of the hearing, I stood outside my farmhouse, watching the soft glow of restored power emanate from my property. I knew that the coming day would be pivotal, a moment when the collective will of our community would force the HOA board to confront the reality of their overreach. My heart pounded with anticipation as I reviewed the final details of my digital dossier, ensuring that every piece of evidence was in place. This was no longer just about a power cut. It was a battle for the soul of our community, a struggle to reclaim our right to live, work, and innovate without fear of arbitrary interference. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, clear morning at the Cedar Grove Community Center, where the final public hearing was underway. The boardroom was packed with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered to witness the final vote that would shape the future of property rights in our community. With a calm, yet unyielding presence, Councilwoman Danielle Price stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective resolve of a community that had had enough. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed power usage logs, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an incontrovertible conclusion. Councilwoman Price began, her voice resonating with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, namely, her decision to cut power to my property as a means of forcing compliance with HOA mandates, were not rooted in any legitimate concern for community safety or aesthetics, but were driven solely by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's fundamental right to manage our own property must be upheld, and no one shall be allowed to impose their will on us through petty acts of retribution. A heavy silence fell over the room as Price continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions and fines related to this incident, and we will launch a full disciplinary review of the policies that permitted such overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines that protect the property rights and personal freedoms of every resident in our community. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an unjust power cut. It is a resounding declaration that we stand for fairness, accountability, and the unalienable right to live without arbitrary interference. Her words struck a deep chord, and murmurs of agreement rippled throughout the assembly. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, a man who had long fought for individual rights, rose to speak. Today we stand united, he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. No resident should ever be subjected to the tyranny of arbitrary rule enforcement. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values freedom and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action. His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a powerful call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local public safety department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official documents confirming that my property modifications were entirely legal and that the power cut was an unwarranted abuse of authority. The evidence was irrefutable. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible for this violation, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Price concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Grove, a community where every resident's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will upon us without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the right to live without fear of arbitrary interference. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and personal freedom. In that defining moment, As every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Grove. The days of petty, arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Grove underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking impassioned debates about property rights, individual freedom, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Grove" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive action taken to protect every resident's right to manage their own property without fear of arbitrary interference. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreToveling, and #LiveFreeCedarGrove trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against overreach. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where creative expression and independence were celebrated rather than stifled. Neighbors who had long lived under the oppressive grip of rigid HOA rules now spoke openly about their right to live freely and to innovate on their own terms. "Our land and our homes are our legacies," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his words resonating through the packed room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Grove would always defend the freedoms of its people. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focusing on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was thoroughly scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or punitive measures. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of individual freedom. When we stand together, our voices can reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive and equitable governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's blatant abuse of power by refusing to bow to her arbitrary demands had not only reclaimed my right to manage my property as I saw fit, but had also ignited a broader movement for individual freedom in Cedar Grove. Neighbors who had long suffered under oppressive regulations found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance, uniting in a common cause. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and personal expression were sacred. Karen Miller, once the unchallenged enforcer of rigid HOA standards, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community unites for justice. Her influence dwindled as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Grove, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the soft glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not only our victory over arbitrary interference, but also our unwavering commitment to live freely and express ourselves fully, Councilwoman Price proclaimed, her voice ringing with determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective resolve to protect our freedoms and ensure that no one could ever again impose their will on our community. As each new day dawned over Cedar Grove, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how Karen cut my power for refusing to join the HOA, and how I turned that injustice into a catalyst for reclaiming my property rights, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in living authentically and independently. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Grove, truth, justice, and the right to live without arbitrary interference would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Grove would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual freedom shone as brightly as the dawn.